What keeps entrepreneurs from connecting and collaborating is trust. If you've never collaborated and saw the benefits of collaboration, then you don't know that you need to. If there is individuals who have strengths that you don't have, and you complement each other, you have those thought partners, those accountability partners that you really can work with well together, the outcome is just amazing. I have been in 5 collaboration books. One of the benefits for me is the time piece, because when you're writing your own book, it does take time. Then secondly, you are opened up to so many more people than you would ever do by yourself. Just the benefit of expanding your reach and your circle is also a benefit in collaboration. I really feel that every entrepreneur needs a book because it helps validate what you're doing. You do the work, you are out there making money off of what you're doing. I like to know what it is that you're doing as an entrepreneur. Tell us your story. Everyone has a story. Which is why I highlight entrepreneurs in the Grind Entrepreneur Network, because I am giving them a question of the day. They are detailing their questions and their responses, and you're getting to know who that entrepreneur is. And so with a book, you're able to do that. Your audience, your clients, your customers, they're able to see who you are as a person and not just as that CEO or that boss that you are of your business. The mission of the Grind Entrepreneur Network is really quite simple. It is to support, connect, develop, and highlight entrepreneurs. The network is just amazing. And so I'm really so glad for that, because when I need services done, I go to my network to see who I can invest in. I really want to do something to help support and highlight entrepreneurs who are on their grind. And that's really how the Grind Entrepreneur Network was born. So Perfect Time SHP, that is really a passion. That is a coaching and consulting firm, and I really just focus on leadership development. I look at those career professionals as well as entrepreneurs. If you are in need of a leadership development coach, if you just need some steps, some guidance, some how-tos on getting your entrepreneur journey started, if you want to up-level your career, certainly reach out to me. Also, if you're an entrepreneur and you want to connect with others that are all across the United States and beyond, and also be highlighted and featured in our Grind Entrepreneur Network Spotlight each month, definitely reach out to SharonHporter.com, and I would love to connect and collaborate with you so that we can definitely support your efforts and make sure that you get the results that you want in your business.
Good morning and happy Sunday. This is the I Am Dr. Sharon Show, presenting Education First. And we are so excited. The whole gang is here today. We are missing our Kalisa Wing, but we have a wonderful, wonderful fill-in, which he's going to introduce himself. Again, I'm Dr. Sharon H. Porter, educator, author, entrepreneur, host, and I want you to find out who my wonderful co-hosts are. We're going to start with our guest today, Naja Baptist, Professor Baptist.
Thank you so much, Doc. Thank you so much. I'm well, and you?
Awesome. Please share a little bit about who you are.
Okay, that's wonderful. My name is Naja Baptist. I'm a PhD candidate and instructor at Howard University. I teach such classes as Black Politics, Pan-Africanism, and American Politics. I'm a former graduate of North Carolina Central University and Jackson State, and I'm currently finishing up my PhD and dissertation at Howard University.
All right, Bison Pride.
You know.
I love it.
The capstone.
That's it, exactly. And Desmond, welcome back. How are you today?
I am doing well. It's good to be here.
Awesome.
It's good to be here as always.
Yes.
Been working really hard. Are we doing updates?
Yes. What's been happening since we talked last?
Everything is happening.
Okay.
The chat is going well. I've spent some time getting prepared for COSBOC, which is the Coalition of Schools Educating Boys of Color. Their national convention is happening in May of this year in my hometown of Detroit. So I'm super excited about that. And there are a few other things I have on tap that I think we're going to save to the end of the program. But busy.
Busy. Exactly. And welcome back, Dr. Essie. We missed you last month, but you've been busy. I heard you got an Educator of the Year award from the DMV Mastermind.
Right.
So please tell us what you've been up to since we've talked with you.
Well, good morning, and indeed, I am delighted to be back this morning. Last show in January, of course, I was out with my dad, but I am delighted to be here this morning. I have been quite busy. I've been participating in some book collaboration projects, so I'm excited about that. As you all may know, and you see my book, The Art of School Transformation, and I can't wait until we get into my topic today.
Yes.
We'll talk a little bit about school transformation. But also I work at George Mason University a little bit, so I'm a professor there. I'm working with teachers and also leaders on development. I'm having a great time in the field of education, still making an impact. So I'm glad to be back with my team.
Yes, we're so glad to have you. And Dr. Anna, what's been going on with you?
Well, as the practitioner in the group, I'm in the grind every day, just loving kids, educating kids, providing leadership opportunities for my teachers, big promoter of providing professional development through the strengths that we have on our campuses. And so just getting better every day. So
I love
we're
it.
excited.
I tell you guys, we have a power hour for you today. I tell you, and it's no need in wasting time because we need to save all the time for these topics. And we're actually going to start out with Desmond today. He has a very interesting topic that he's going to bring forth today. Desmond, what do you have for us today?
Well, good morning again, everyone. I feel like more so than any of our other shows, I was having a hard time thinking about what I wanted to discuss because there is so much that I feel that's happened over the last 30 days. But in Lakeland, Florida, there was an 11-year-old black boy, who was essentially arrested for not participating in the Pledge of Allegiance at his school. And there were conflicting reports depending on what news article or news resource outlet that you read. But essentially, the school district said that the young boy was not arrested for not participating in the pledge. He was arrested because of his behavior. And to give a brief overview, the classroom teacher was out that day. There was a substitute, and the children were saying the pledge, and the little boy did not participate in the pledge. The teacher said, according to the student allegedly, if you don't want to participate in the pledge, you have to participate in the pledge. If you don't like America, then why don't you move someplace else? These kind of microaggressions that we hear.
Exactly what she
The student allegedly stopped short of saying, the teacher said, go back to Africa or something along those lines. But the mother was very distraught, as you can imagine. It was alleged that her son said, America is racist and Trump is racist and the flag is racist, but the mother disputed those claims, saying that she never taught her son that and that she does not believe that herself. The resource officer got involved because the student wouldn't leave the room, and apparently he was belligerent, allegedly, and he was threatening staff members, the resource officer, as well as the substitute, and that's what led to his ultimate arrest. I think about a day or so later, the charges were dropped, whatever the charges would be. But my question is, what do we think, and how do we stop these? I wouldn't even call that a microaggression. It's absolute hostility for an 11-year-old to deal with a police officer with what I consider to be a classroom-based issue. So what do we think?
So that's interesting that you start with that article, because my article, as you all know, will be talking about the racial healing within schools, how do we transform schools. But definitely, when I was a practitioner, and that was last year, I retired once again July 2018, definitely I gave kids an opportunity to participate or not participate. Just like with the moment of silence, with the Pledge of Allegiance, I asked them to please talk with their parents about what they prefer to do. And then you conduct yourselves accordingly. So I think we need to have sensitivity to the different cultures and different diversity that we do encounter within our schools and take that into
think just the simple beliefs, take that into consideration. But I wanted to pivot to what they say was the real issue, and not the pledge, but the behavior.
Right.
That would not have occurred had they not even addressed him not participating in the pledge. So to me, that's the issue there. And just like you, and I thought it was in most school districts that children have the option to participate. And so I'm not really sure about Florida, and I'm not sure if anyone knows, but you researched that.
Did some digging.
Okay.
And it is by all means within our constitutional rights, our First Amendment rights, to not participate in the Pledge of Allegiance. And it's interesting. I was reading an article, and I can't remember the professor's name, but he's a professor at American, and he said when we think about this issue in terms of constitutional rights, we're actually missing a really important point about the history and the legacy of the Pledge of Allegiance and what it was originally started from. And I just kind of, I wouldn't call it a deep dive, but essentially, if I can just give a brief background, the pledge was written by a Boston minister in 1891 to commemorate the 400-year anniversary of Columbus coming to America. And it was stated that America at that time wanted to have a program of patriotism for children. So this person, his name was Francis Bellamy, was commissioned to write the pledge. But in the backdrop of all of that were American having a backlash of immigrants coming from Eastern Europe. And it was said that these immigrants, who were mostly Russian and Polish and Jewish, were dumbing down the quote-unquote immigrant pool of America. So there's some xenophobia within the pledge. And I wonder if we feel that today, certainly to the degree that if you are not participating in the national anthem, if you are not participating in the pledge, then you are not one of us, and then you are not protected by our laws. And from my own perspective, not being there, I think that's an issue that we're dealing with the resource officer coming in and dealing with this student. So I'm interested to hear what you all
Right. I mean, and as the political scientist on the panel, I always think of this in terms of politics. And people always often want to separate school and education from politics. When, like you were saying, education is an actual constitutional right? And so the understanding of these actual patterns that we're seeing, because this is not the first time this happened, right? The little girl a couple years ago that was sitting inside the seat, the resource officer came, dragged her out, right? There was also another recent event in Durham, North Carolina, where a little white boy took a knee doing a Pledge of Allegiance, right? But no one said nothing. They applauded him as, this type of encouraging behavior and freedom of speech. So what's the difference here, right? The difference is the idea that government and schools function as a socializing agent. So what does that mean, right? So politics is defined as an authoritative allocation of values and resources. So you're distributing values and resources. And the schools have always been traditionally a form of assimilating and providing culture to students, right? My mother was a teacher for 35 years. So this understanding of making it a behavior issue is to say, well, that's how we present it in a race-neutral manner, right? So we don't want to say, no, it was because he was a black kid and he didn't say what I want, he didn't do what I wanted him to do. You can't say that exactly, right? This is kind of a post-racial, egalitarian society. Everyone's equally access to this understanding. But what it's really about underneath all this, which is what I study, which is about catalytic events. This idea that race becomes salient, right? So what's the difference between the kid in Florida and the kid in Durham? The little black girl that got pulled out of her seat and the little white boy in Durham. This is all issue of race, right? You don't, right? Because behavior just says, well, we have already defined what it means to be an American, right? And patriotism, right? Patriotism is the main way that we do this. We do this by saying these are the indicators of what it means to be an American, right? So Beth Tice Moore wrote a book called Who Counts as an American? So Simone de Beauvoir once argued that what it means to be a woman has already been defined. We can also say what it means to be an American is already defined too, right? So it's already defined to say you have to stand, you have to put your hand over the heart. These are cultural indicators, right? And so what we're really seeing is politics playing out in a cultural setting. It's an actual culture war that's actually going on.
It is a culture war. I believe that.
Yeah.
And if I can add to that as the practitioner and the principal who would be faced with this situation, right? I think one of the systemic issues is the training of substitute teachers and people that come onto our campus, and not just as a county that expectations, but within the school, having that opportunity to train our people coming into our campus as to the expectations of how we treat children and what we want for our school and for our children. And this has, it's not new to me because I've had to deal with situations like this and having to have those conversations. And I think more and more it's trying to be proactive and knowing when I have new people on my campus and having that conversation ahead of time as to how I want my children to be treated. So I think that would be an answer to this situation where it's like it could have totally been addressed differently, because it's really about a culture of respect. It's a culture of expecting people and valuing people's differences and differences of opinion and beliefs. And so that was not in place, because if that was in place, then very simply, this child chose not to, and it should have been respected. And that's the bottom line.
Right. And it's also a difference between diversity and cultural competence, right? So it's the idea of making sure that you have substitutes that look like some of the students that are there, right? Also that those that don't look like them, to understand it's not simply the idea of tolerating students, right? You tolerate their behavior, you tolerate whatever they're doing. You actually understand that it is their cultural right, and constitutional right to sit there and say, I don't like the Pledge of Allegiance, right? And then you actually can use it as a teachable moment. I totally agree. But we have to also understand that schools don't exist within a vacuum. So the people that we're bringing in are coming in with these attitudes and values that they already have. And maybe no matter how much training we give them, right, it's still a level of cognitive dissonance that says, I don't want to deal with this, right? I'm not going to ever deal with this. This is disrespectful. And then when you have a president that sits high and says, it's okay to call players that take knees during the Pledge of Allegiance. SOBs, right? And so you're literally conditioning people, right? You're conditioning the values, right? And those that subscribe to those values say, well, this is how I'm going to respond, right? And so it's like what Carter G. Woodson says, if you control a person's mind, you control their thinking, right? You don't have to tell them when to sit, when to stand, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, in fact, if you tell them to build a door and there is no door, they will build one just to appease you, right? So we're talking about how you control people's choices. I can't look at you and say, well, you're a racist simply because you're white or because you're black, right? I could just simply say, based on your choices that you made, this helps me understand who you are and your actual behavior traits. Right?
You know, I think going beyond the rights of this, earlier this week, I believe it was on the 19th, was the 54-year anniversary of Malcolm X's assassination.
Yeah, Malik Shabazz.
And I was lost on YouTube. I spent a lot of time lost on YouTube. And Malcolm X was given an interview, and he was disputing someone who was talking about the difference between human rights and civil rights. And the point that he made is it doesn't matter what civil rights you're given. If you don't have human rights, then you're not going to be protected under a set of quote-unquote human laws. And I think ultimately we're looking at the over-policing and the criminalization of anything that boys of color, and really it's, I don't even think it's a gender issue. I think it's black and brown people in general. Thinking back to, I believe that was around Christmas time, where the young brother who was a wrestler had to cut his hair.
In the middle of the match. In the middle of the match.
In the middle of a match.
This is unheard of.
When
Parents,
it's obvious,
coach is sitting there just trying to tell him to calm down.
He had dreadlocks.
I was dumbfounded.
He didn't grow up. He didn't like wake up that morning with dreadlocks. He had been wrestling for the previous 2 years. So this idea of not having rights permeates into all facets of our human activity. So.
I tell you, so guys, we don't want to stop the conversation. Please let us know your thoughts on this topic. The article has been put on the link on the I Am Dr. Sharon Show, as well as my page, the Sharon Hogg Reporter personal page. Let us know what you think. Read the article. Give us your opinion and your take. So we're going to move on to Anna for another hot topic. She is going to address detention of immigrant children. Anna, what do you have for us?
Well, thank you for letting me bring this to the forefront, because I think with what has happened with the criminalization of immigrant families coming to the border for issues in their countries that historically have been caused by U.S. policy in their countries, So we have had,
You should say that. That was very subtle.
Right.
Right. No, say that louder.
so there have been over 15,000 children since June 14th, 2018, that have been separated from their families. And last summer, I traveled back home to El Paso, Texas, and the Tornillo tent cities there, and I think you've heard about that. We've had many people that have been witnessing. There's a website called Witness Tornillo. This tent city, which has been called a tender age center, which breaks my heart because it is just a way that children are being separated from their families. They've been called unaccompanied minors. They're unaccompanied because they've been separated from their families. and so this tent city was designed to hold 450 minors, but since then, like I said, 6,200 children have been held there. In January of this month, of this year, January 11th, 2019, it was closed down. So I'm thankful for that, but still children are being held separately from their parents. So the article is Teach In for Freedom. It was held February 17th in El Paso, Texas. Mandy Manning, which is the 2018 Teacher of the Year and teaches immigrant children in Washington State, decided that she wanted to use her platform, as her platform is the educating of immigrant children. So in El Paso, they had tried to get teachers from every state to attend and have lessons and teach in about immigration issues. Ivana Roscoe, who is the Teacher of the Year from New Mexico, and that's where I hail from recently, even though I grew up in Texas, I'm from New Mexico. She is an actual dreamer that has become Teacher of the Year, and if it wasn't for the policy of the Dreamers, she would not have been able to fulfill her dream and be a participating, active, productive citizen in the United States. And so my question is, for all of us, is what is the role of educators as social justice warriors? Because I think we see that more and more. We are being called to be the voice for those that cannot speak for themselves. And what is the responsibility that we have to educate undocumented children and immigrant children?
My initial response as a reading and writing teacher, I'm always trying to get children to understand this idea of a code. And this country, really the entire Western Hemisphere, is based on the usage of code and laws. And as a quote-unquote social justice warrior, getting children to look at all of the issues that we currently see in this world through the lens of our people who need help getting the help that they need. And if they're not, what is my responsibility as an 8-year-old or even as a 15-year-old or as a 16-year-old? And I talk a lot about as a teacher, are you interested in law? Are you interested in politics? Because we need people who will fight, but we also need people who are fighting and changing laws.
Yes.
And listening to you, Doc, mention, what was the term that they,
Tender age centers.
Unattended children?
Unaccompanied minors.
Unaccompanied minors,
It
yeah.
reminds me of when, in the late 90s, when the ethnic Albanians were being slaughtered by Milosevic, and we come to find out like 2 years later that those people were Muslims. But the media used this term. It's like, what is an ethnic Albanian? So we use this coded language, and I think as teachers, helping children break that code and then giving them the skill set and the passion and the compassion to want to build another code. I think that's highly important as a teacher and an educator.
And I would agree completely with you. I think as a practitioner, former practitioner, I once was the principal of a school where we had a large Latino population. So people had certain prejudices and ideas and beliefs about the school and about the kids within the school. And so as a leader, I couldn't really think about what they were doing at the federal level, what they were doing at the state level, and sometimes even the local level. But every day knowing what is right and morally what is right as a leader walking into that building, making sure that I created a climate that was conducive to learning, that kids came in, no matter where you came from, you felt safe. You felt like it was an inviting, a warm place, nurturing place, that you get people in there that are educating the kids who are wanting to be there, they're passionate about serving the kids. It is a lot of hard work, as I always say, but it goes back to what is right. We sometimes can operate from the understanding, what would you want for your own child? That is
Exactly.
what we
That's
need
the
to-
litmus test. It
Yeah,
is.
what is it that you want for your own child? And then put plans in place, initiatives in place in order to make sure that every child is touched in a positive way.
Yeah. And Anna, I really think that it starts at the top. I mean, it really does, and it trickles down.
Yes,
You
it
have
does.
to be that leader that's going to be that social justice warrior in order to fight for what's right. Basically, is what you're saying. But leadership matters, and I will continue to say that. And so we have to make sure that the leaders are in place that are going to make that happen. That I really believe that.
And so, as a political scientist, someone who teaches political science, right? The idea that when I teach my Intro to American Government class, the first thing I teach my students is that I don't teach you politics. I teach you citizenship, right? How to engage inside the polity, how to demand policy outcomes, how to demand for a better society, right? So everyone can say, well, I think what I'm doing is right, and you think what you're doing is right? But there's an idea of being intellectually honest here, right? And so when we're understanding the law, right, the law is simply an administrative tool and a regulatory tool to maintain the status quo, right? So those that define how the law should be applied says these children are beyond the law. They're beyond the right. So they have, the idea of keeping children inside cages, right? The idea of literally ripping children from their parents and then putting them in front of a judge, right? We should automatically say that's a violation of the Geneva Convention, right? Like, who does this to children, right? But the idea is that when you dehumanize a section of people, when you make them inferior, and we've seen this throughout history, especially when it relates to African American and black people, right? This idea of seeing them as simply animals and property, and this idea of this resurgence of blackface, et cetera, et cetera. What you're seeing here is a reconditioning, right? A reconditioning of saying, we are going to draw the lines of what it means to be an American again, right? And these children, even though they are children, and I have children, right? I'm going to talk about the elementary school proposal next, but it's the idea that, I know best for these children, right? Even though they are there, they are simply like pets, right? And so they don't count as an actual American. They shouldn't actually be considered. And this simply idea that how we want to define and how we want to actually exist as an actual country, like Dr. Sharon was saying, it starts at the top, right? You have a president that literally is saying, we want to build a wall, right? Knowing that the wall doesn't work, knowing that they've been down there, and you literally had agents tell him that people are building tunnels under the wall.
I'm not so sure he doesn't believe that it will work, but let me jump in for a second. I think it's also important when we think about, I'm going to push back on this notion of it starts at the top. Okay. When you study the nature of change, whether it's a classroom, whether we're talking about a grand political landscape, there's always been substantive movement that's come from grassroots movements. And I think it's important as we talk about children and students, how do we get them to understand and believe in this whole notion of capacity building? Because as you said earlier, brother, none of this is new. Right. And there could be 50 years from now, another Dr. Sharon Show. If we don't teach kids the importance of rallying and building capacity and working together to make change, whether it's financial change or political change, then we'll keep on spinning our wheels. Right. And what I'm calling, because all of our topics are related to racism and white supremacy, if we don't find a way to come together and fight that, then we'll just spin our
Well,
wheels
you
at
also
the
have to
same
understand. I don't think what we're saying is any different. I don't think we're saying. I think it's actually mutually exclusive. I think we're saying we have to resist. We have to do something about these issues, and we have to start putting pressure at those at the top end and the bottom. Right. So the idea of social justice has never been simply precluded to just simply attacking the president. Right. The idea of defeating white supremacy and defeating racism has to start with the idea of understanding that we live in a race-neutral society. This is the burning house that King warned us of, right? He said, I feel as though I've led my people and integrated my people into a burning house, right? The idea was we accepted this understanding that says, well, we're no longer going to use race as an actual litmus, right? We're not going to use immigration, that's a cultural specific issue, as an actual litmus, which means that government says, we don't intervene. So no matter how much you organize, no matter, just like with some of the protests with the Black Lives Matter movement, eventually it got to the point that the government was telling them when to march, where to march, where they can actually go. So you can organize, right? But you also have to understand that you have to connect protest to politics. We disconnected that in 1972 at the Gary, Indiana convention, right? That said that we're going to simply focus on the electoral form of it. But we forgot that by simply focusing on the electoral form, but not having the protest side of it, and demanding race specificity, gender specificity, sexual orientation specificity, right? You end up having this problem where you can make all this noise you want to, but the government simply says, well, that's incompatible. It's incompatible with the egalitarian society, right? So it's the idea of going at the top and the bottom and actually coming together. That's how we've always made change.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification, because that this multi-pronged approach to what I call capacity building, I think is what schools should be built on, to be quite honest with you. And I was reading another article about this whole notion of kids are bored at school. Like, how do we get them engaged in activities that are meaningful outside of the door that they walk out every day?
Right. And again, that goes back to the idea that if you have a government that sees activism as something that students don't need to do, or that the issue isn't systemic, that the issue is simply the individuals and their behavior, then it's going to be hard for them to actually create a curriculum that allows principals, that allow administrators to say, okay, let's do some social justice component. No government that's actually been oppressive wants to actually have some people that say, let me train you to fight against the system that's actually paying you, right? So the powerful never wants to teach the powerless how to have power, right? But in a democracy, the power always lies with the people, and the government simply has authority. And again, those that do talk about these things are being punished for it, right? And so the idea is it's kind of to the point whether you're going to stand or not stand.
I love it. Guys, what do you think? Hot topics here on Education First. Guys, we have 2 more hot topics, but we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back. Naja Baptist is going to bring his discussion as well as Dr. Essie. So, guys, please stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Are you a business owner or author? Advertise on the I Am Dr. Sharon Show. The Dr. Sharon Show will promote your business with viewers across the United States and beyond. Contact us, iamdrsharonshow.com, for more information.
Shirley Liu has been in the financial services industry for over 20 years and is committed to securing your financial future through sound financial planning, education, and even training for those who want to start a career in financial services. Through innovative retirement, savings, and educational programs powered by First Financial Security, team prepare you to thrive with your money. Accredited by the BBB, Shirley Liu Finance is safe and sound investing.
guys, we are going to continue the dialogue and the discussion. We have Naja Baptist up next, who's going to be sharing his commentary and telling us about this Arkansas legislator who proposed cutting lunch funding for schools who are struggling with reading. So, Naja,
okay, so this kind of ties into everything that we've been saying, right? And kind of everything I've been saying, especially about politics and the allocation and distribution of values, right? And, it's not simply defined as an authoritative allocation. It's also defined as who gets what, when and how, or as I like to say, who don't get what, right? And so what this Representative Alan Clark from Arkansas is actually arguing is that we cut school lunch funding in order to kind of, as what he calls an incentive to force teachers and students. I guess the idea is that if you cut the funding and students are hungry, I'm just trying to go through the logic here, right? Trying to rationalize the irrational. If you cut student funding of lunches, that maybe they'll put pressure. And the teachers will eventually try to work hard. But again, I think this is misguided by the very fact that, again, this is the idea of a Republican legislator. The Republican platform and conservatism as a whole believes in little to no government funding, no government intervention, right? And so throughout history, we have always seen what I call the austerity cuts, right? The cut to before and after school programming. The cut to any type of educational funding that seems to be productive. I remember there was a sister that presented some research at North Carolina Central a few years back. One of her studies showed that they had cut the funding of the high school students going to college, right, in North Carolina, and how that adversely impacted the students. So then the students no longer had the type of advantage to be able to take courses that could help them get into college, right? And so the idea is, again, this idea in the post-civil rights, the post-racial area, that you're basically saying no government intervention. And so you're dealing with what I call FDP, which is financialization, deregulation, and privatization. So it makes the public schools, again, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It makes public schools seem deficient, right? Look at them. They can't feed their students. They can't get up their reading levels. We tried to help them, right? I think at one point the guy says that people that don't understand, he says, but sadly many educators act like I have asked them to storm the beaches of Normandy, right? It appears I have much more faith in our schools than our educators do. Right, and these are literally, this is a direct quote. It's not me, right? It's a direct quote from the senator. So it creates this new false dichotomy that you're seeing even with the president about this idea of socialism, right? It's just this. It makes it a blanket statement, socialism versus capitalism. When you always had socialistic enterprises inside of a capitalistic system, right? You had the New Deal programs. You've had post offices. You've had all these understandings that you can have socialistic enterprises within the American system. And so this goes into this idea.
Stadiums for owners, that's
right.
entitlement.
Right. And then the idea of how schools are actually funded, the difference between public schools and private schools. Public schools are funded by taxpayers, bonds, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, the educators can speak to it. So the question then that I have is, what are our kids to do? Like, why do we allow schools to disconnect children from their learning environments? And can we really blame the youth then, right, for failing, right, later on and becoming, the studies that show the correlation between crime and poverty, that the more poverty that there is, the more likely kids are going to go into crime, and and the intervening variable is always education, right, not having quality education. Me being from Baltimore, West Baltimore, I've actually seen this a lot. Right, the idea of they literally defund the schools and then they wonder why students aren't, and then you raise the student-to-teacher ratio, they don't have food to eat, this idea of malnutrition. So where does that leave the children, right, and how do we work on, preventing these type of bills from even coming up,
Wow, you said a lot. And I can tell you that we really need to take a comprehensive look, and it would be great if some of these people that are making decisions on behalf of schools, public education, if they could come and live in a school where the entire school is 100% free and reduced lunch. Yeah. I spent almost 30 years of my life serving kids at Promise students who came coming into the school with so many challenges and so many factors, yet and still, we have to make sure we provide for their basic needs before we can meet their academic needs. That is critical.
Yes,
Absolutely.
Maslow before
Absolutely.
Bloom. Maslow before Bloom.
So to funding for
We got
food,
research, right?
that is unreal. That's unreal.
I look at it in terms of this whole idea of crime and what crime is.
Right.
If I heard you right, and I didn't read the article, but this legislator is saying I can incentivize students to perform better academically by taking away food.
Oh yeah.
That's basically.
The
So,
school itself, right?
That sounds like a crime to me. And it makes me wonder, how is it that people who, our resident politician,
Politician.
how is it that
Political
people,
scientist, right? I'm not
how
a
is it-
politician. I want nothing to do with it.
how,
Political
I stand corrected, how is it that people who write laws get to be criminal? And I mean, it's sick on every level or every angle that I can
Verse,
absolutely look at it, to the degree that there's a false assumption that students and teachers and parents aren't already trying.
Yes.
So let me
Yes.
incentivize it by,
Yes.
I mean, most people, when they want to give incentives, they offer something as opposed to
Take it
take
away.
something away, especially food, clothing, and shelter. I mean, that's the weirdest thing in the world. Like, why don't we just take the roof off of the building or take heat away? Like, how about that? Let's turn on the air conditioning in February and freeze you kids until you start reading appropriately. I mean, I don't really.
It doesn't make sense to me. I don't even understand how, and I'm not sure where they are with this proposal. But I just, right.
We hope it gets vetoed at some point.
I just
Somebody
can't
take it
even
out, please.
imagine,
Yeah,
yeah, that
right,
even
right.
someone would even look at this and say that that's okay.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I think it makes sense from the perspective of, and again, we're talking about race here. I think it makes sense from the perspective of I have little as the
Disproportionately
legislator,
affected, right?
I have
Disproportionately
little
affected.
belief that you guys are going to read on grade level or be successful anyway. We talked about this whole notion of a propaganda machine that's dehumanizing people
Self-fulfilling.
and it creating this self-fulfilling prophecy. But I think it was our last show, we talked about this idea of school funding and that,
We did.
$200 per day for a child in a suburb is equal to the $200 a day that you give a child in the inner city, but that inner city school is in need of more resources because of trauma, because of poverty, because of high crime
Right,
rates, because
right.
of all of these other traumatic experiences that people have been exposed to. So even though those $2 amounts are the same, there's no equity there.
Right,
Right.
right, and that's right.
So when you putting it in the context of this Arkansas legislator, you're just taking steps backwards. Because if we're really interested in equity and helping students with their reading, which is what he proposes, then you would be thinking about, is there a need for more funding? Is there a need for more resources?
Exactly.
Or maybe we could take the monies that we have and put them,
Allocate
allocate them in
Right.
a different place as opposed to
Right.
taking food out of children's stomachs. So,
Well, I think it's really the bigger issue is that this is based on ignorance, and
agree.
and we really need to look at our political leadership and be the activists to get people into those positions that can make intelligent decisions. Because I think more and more we're seeing these people that are speaking out of ignorance are being given this platform to say it's okay to say and do whatever it is
Whatever it is.
without having any kind of background information, any kind of knowledge as to what the impact is of my words. And so when he's talking about taking food away from children, those children are children of color. And he's not of color. And it's very easy for him to say what he says without any impact being on his children or children, like him. So it's really disheartening for me as a principal to know that anybody can even be given a platform and that this is on national news
Right.
for us to even have to have this
But we're seeing this
conversation.
play out in real time, right? Like last year with the Baltimore public schools, because of the funding cut that they had, schools were literally without heat in the winter. I don't know if you've seen the live cast with the teacher showing the students inside their bubble coats and jackets. And then during the summer, they had no air. I have a friend of mine who actually works at one of the local schools, literally said students were literally almost passing out inside the school. They told the principal told the superintendent told the school board. But the problem is they continue to elect the governor and Hogan, who continues to cut funding and just simply appear inside the African American neighborhoods. So the idea is that even though the study that came out called the $1 Million Blocks, that showed like literally in Chicago that there were 18 blocks where they had intentionally decreased educational funding and increased the criminal justice appearance, right? So it's the idea of being, as you were saying earlier, intellectually honest, right? So when we see these politicians and we see these people that are in place using our authority and abusing our authority, I always tell my students, voting is not enough. It's a first step. It's an important step, but it's not enough. Voting is not enough. Activism is a must. You must put demands on the system. As Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without demand. It never has, and it never will. Right? We know these things are happening. We know that this proposal more than likely will get passed in the state that used to be ran by Bill Clinton, right? And so we have to also understand what's going on, even not only in other parties, what's going on within our parties too. So
But I think that's a very good point, because people do think that it ends with voting. So that's
the problem.
Like huge point that we
major,
need to make.
major.
That you can't. Yeah, you need to.
And only
cast your vote.
every 4 years or every 2 years. They don't even worry about the local election.
The local one,
Right,
exactly.
right.
So it's so much more. That's a wonderful point. So guys, again, what do you think about this? I'm just going to say it. Crazy proposal. What do you think? Whether you agree, disagree, we want to hear about it in the feed. So definitely let us know. And this really leads us to Dr. Essie's whole discussion about transforming schools into sites of racial healing. And I tell you, and these individuals, they don't know what each other's going to talk about. And so today it has just come full circle. And so, Dr. Essie, what do you have for us today?
You are exactly right. It's almost like we had ESP.
Right.
Absolutely.
Just seeing what we're
The
going to
overlap.
talk about.
Yes.
But my article is pretty much a summation of what we've
Yes.
all touched
Right.
on.
Right.
And you know, they talk about gun safety, they talk about school safety, but yet and still there's an underlining topic that we don't talk about within schools. Some of us don't. Some of us do. Real leaders do stand up and do have that conversation. But definitely, I guess my question is, because they talked about, once again, the gun safety, they talked about school safety, they talked about how racism still is prevalent in some of the schools and we don't really address it. We sort of sweep it under the rug. We have racial amnesia. We really don't, have that conversation. We don't feel comfortable talking about it. So what are some things that we can actually institute within our public schools in order to start that conversation?
Right.
What are some strategies and techniques? And I just leave that open to the group.
Yeah,
Before I
absolutely.
share.
Absolutely. And I just think awareness, first of all. And so once we are aware that these things are happening, and then you have to take action. Like you cannot, this is something you can't be on the sidelines for. You have to be in the game, making the moves, and it takes courageous leaders to do this, because I'm going to say it again, it starts at the top. You have to be courageous enough as a building leader, as a district leader, as a state leader, to make sure that it's the right things are happening in these schools. So racial healing, for me, it's been a while since I've seen such racial healing. I mean, it's just amazing at the comfort level of people that feel like they can say, the audacity, exactly, say and do anything that they feel is what they feel. And I just think that's because of the leadership.
Yes.
I'm just going to say it. That he has made it okay.
Yes, he did.
To say and do things. And it's really sad. So I just think the awareness and then the action. And it takes the courageous leadership to make that happen.
You are exactly right. And that's one of the strategies that they talked about in the article, making sure that you do acknowledge it and making sure that you do have discussions. Don't be afraid to talk about this. Put it on the table. And it goes back to what you said, those strong leaders, having the courage. Sometimes we have to have those courageous conversations.
Absolutely.
So all of that was mentioned in the article.
Right. It's always two things that people fear talking about in society, right? It's politics and religion,
And religion,
right?
yes.
And why is that? Because that makes you be self-reflective, right? And so I argue always, and it's so great that Dr. Sharon talked about it, because this is actually what my dissertation deals with, the awareness that leads to action, right? How do we cause what I call political contagion, right? People think of contagion as something negative, a virus, etc. But happiness is contagiousness, right? Progress is also contagiousness too. And so we that are a part of these social and civic organizations, the religious organizations, we have to start demanding that we have these tough conversations. We have to start demanding that we sit down with the local organizations, that they start demanding and formalizing these voting blocks and showing that not only will we show up to vote, but we will also show up to your office. We will also show up to the city council meeting. We will also show up and support those teachers that strike. We will do whatever we have to do to ensure that progress is had. Right?
In some of my work and helping schools help black boys, I've been asked a few times to facilitate conversations around equity and race, and it is so difficult to get principals who know their schools are in need of that help to take their stance. Like, what do you believe, and what does the rest of your administrative team believe? And I'm thinking of a school in particular who reached out to me and said, you know, our school has a classroom that just needs help. It's not a school-wide thing, but we have, 7 black boys in this one room, and they're just running amok. And they wanted me to come in and teach. And I was like, well, I can't come in and teach. What do you. But in talking to the principal, there was so much that they had not done in terms of engaging parents. There's so much they hadn't done in terms of engaging students. There's so much they had not done in terms of creating a community within this particular classroom. Now, when you blow that up and you're talking about a school of 450 children or 500 some odd children, how are we having conversations where everyone feels safe? And it's part of my limited experience in doing this work is creating that space where everyone feels that they can say what they need to say, and helping teachers understand if my girls are not doing well, or if if my black or brown boys are not doing well, or brown children are not doing well, that doesn't mean I am racist, right? We're here to work together to create a solution. Getting teachers to be in that space is really, really difficult, and creating that space is really where the 50% of the work, I would say, is okay. We are a team. This is not finger pointing or those kind of things, to help us have a conversation so we can actually say this is what we think our problem is.
And you're right. I was just reflecting on my own journey, my own experience. Like I said, about 30 years in public education, and I went into some of the most challenging schools. And as I reflected, I thought about this article and what was my most challenging work. Yes, it was student achievement, because when you're working in highly impacted schools, you have to transform every single thing about the school. But race relations, I can recall, not me, but I can recall some people, some leaders just saying no to an initiative in order to have conversations about race relations, because it would just bring upheavalness to their teachers and within their school context. And so you really have to engage everybody in the conversation, as you were saying before.
And there's a book out called Racism Without Racists, right? Eduardo Silvia talks about this idea, right? And so, again, as Dr. Sharon was saying, it starts from the top, but not simply with the president, but with the Supreme Court. So there was a case from 2012 called Shelby County v. Holder. People look at it more so as an electoral law, but literally the opinion inside the decision is what's important here. Because they're literally saying racism no longer exists, right? So literally the measures that we use, right, Section 5, which is a measure that said we have counties that engage in this type of racist behavior. These measures that we use that were race specific are no longer needed, right? And so what happens then when you say I need racial healing? The root word there is race, right? You're not simply talking about it in the terms of phenotype, but you also in terms of state of consciousness and experience, right? But no state legislator is going to say, I'm going to provide funding for a race-specific program, right? Because again, it's not tenable on a national level. It's not tenable on a state level, because then you have to deal with ideas and issues of having an uncomfortable conversation around what is race, right?
I'm not familiar with that book, but a colleague of mine who's kind of served as a mentor to me gave Racism Without Races. She gave that book to a school as a study book, and she said it was such an aha
Yes, it
moment
is.
for
Political
the
scientists,
teachers in the
right?
building, like, almost a V8 moment. So.
And what is so interesting, we talk about the adults in the building, but what about the kids? They can feel that.
Yes, they can.
Absolutely.
Yes, they can.
In the context of the school.
Absolutely. So, guys, I tell you what, an hour. We are at the end of our hour. These topics today have been hot, hot, hot. And so we want to take these last few minutes and just let you know what's coming up with each of us, and also how can you contact and connect with each of us. And we're going to start with Desmond.
Good morning again, everyone. You can reach me at on Instagram and Twitter at Nylinka. That's NYLINKA, and at www.nylinka.org. What's coming up? I have over the last week decided that I'm going to hold a literacy camp this summer.
Oh, nice.
And it'll probably be a really small cohort of black boys, but we're going to talk about textual lineages, and we're going to read some deep and heavy text to kind of connect boys with a more global, the more global world of reading. So I'm actually excited and really looking forward to that. I've also put, I would say, I'm 90% done with my first book.
Awesome.
Brother mentioned Martin Luther King. The book is called A Burning House, Educating Black Boys in Modern America. So I've just got a text from my graphic designer. We have a cover design. A good friend of mine who will remain nameless has agreed to write the foreword. So those are some things that are coming up, along with, again, Kozbach, May 8th through Michigan.
Um,
Also, I have my own educational consulting business. I'm working with teachers, helping to develop educators throughout the area in the DMV. That is www.drsespeaks.com, and you can look at all my contact information. I'm writing 2 books, or co-authoring book collaboration projects, and still writing my own book. So lots of writing, lots of speaking engagement. Please follow me on all the social media platforms, Instagram,